Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of The Savvy Capitalist. Today, we're going to talk about asset protection, how you can minimize risk by legally protecting your assets in the best possible way. Just before I begin, just a quick raise of hands, everyone here, if you can hear me, if everyone's okay today. Thank you, Emil. And thank you, Kenny, Jan, Raul, Ka. For all of those who have joined us from all over the world, thank you very much for being here today. Okay, great. I would just like to start today by saying the world today is just so crazy, isn't it? We've just gotten out of a pandemic and we're in the middle of a looming recession and a potential nuclear war. I have not felt so much unease as I have for as long as I lived. How are you protecting yourself and your family? What are the choices that we have? We've put together this series of webinars where we'll be inviting experts in their fields to share more about how to become savvy capitalists in an increasingly unstable world. It's now no longer enough to make wealth. We must protect our wealth for us and our families. Now, many of us here today in the webinar are entrepreneurs. Most of us start our journey in the same way. We have an idea, we go out into the world selling that idea, and along the way, we build our business and our wealth. However, many of us in that journey never really stop to consider how we can protect our wealth. I have had the unfortunate experience of losing everything that I've built before, and I do not wish it to happen to anyone. It's really, really painful. Today, I'm very excited that we can talk about the importance and explain the importance of asset protection. We are very honored and very excited to have with us Mr. Todd Culkin from Warren Law USA to tell us all about it. Now, before I hand over the mic to him, please remember that this is an open session. We're more than willing. This is a consultative session. I'd like all of you to see the little Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, right? Anytime you have any questions, just type it into the Q&A box and we'll get to them as soon as possible throughout the session. Please do not type into the chat box and type it into the Q&A box instead. Now, without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to bring onto screen Todd. Thank you so much for being on our webinar today.
Greetings and salutations, Vince. Thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Before we begin, please tell us more about yourself and the work you do.
Sure thing. So I'm an asset protection attorney. I've been a corporate attorney now for about 12 years. I started my career at a large law firm, went out on my own for about 10 years, and then joined the Warren Law Group. And I handle 5 verticals. First is general corporate law, anything you expect from a GC. Securities offerings, also handle tax-exempt organizations, which can be quite helpful, especially those charities. Fourth is international commerce, which is what we do here. And fifth is Web3. And for the most part, my job is to make sure that while you are making more money, that you are setting yourself up in a way that you lose less money in the end.
I can imagine that being very important today. So, legally, asset protection, what does it mean?
So asset protection, in terms of the tools that are available, means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but essentially what it is making sure that you're structured in such a way that one activity does not harm an asset on the other side. So just at its very basic, like the sort of rocks foundation of it, what's called the corporate veil. Right. So if you think of your personal assets and your business assets, you think of them being together, or say you're a sole proprietorship. Right now, if say you get into a car accident, the wily plaintiff's attorney can go after your business assets. Or if someone says that your company breached a contract, they can go after your personal assets. The whole idea is to separate those things out so that what you do personally and what you do in business are separated and no one can attack both at the same time. And obviously, as things get more sophisticated, especially when you're dealing with Web3, if you're an entrepreneur, doing all sorts of other things all over the world, it gets more complex. But at its very basic, the foundation is making sure that the different parts of your life don't intermingle so that your assets can be protected from attack.
But isn't that why we set up companies in the first place? To keep these things separate? You mean anyone can go after anything in our life if we don't set it up properly?
So yes, and a lot of times folks who set up a company, say they just file an LLC or an Inc., they think that that's all they need to do and they're protected. Well, I've dealt with a lot of situations where they didn't do things right, and therefore a plaintiff's attorney was able to what's called piercing the corporate veil, right? Saying, hey, judge, these aren't actually separated. It's actually one's an alter ego over the other. Things like keeping separate bank accounts, keeping separate, tax statements, etc. So it's not just registering the company that will protect you. It's not just click a button and you're done. It's that you have to do what's called corporate governance, right? The idea that the things that you're doing on the corporate side are in fact corporate in nature, and the things you're doing on the personal side are not bleeding over.
I see. Is this for everybody? Anyone here, should pay attention to this right now? What a difference. And what are the difference between, like, if I'm an entrepreneur, or is this also apply to people who are income earners or asset holders?
Well, it really could apply to anybody, but let's kind of take it from the basic and bring it up in sophistication. Let's say you own a house. Right, you own a house. You have a client who he owns a house in his name, and there's an accident in the house, right? And the people got hurt really bad, and unfortunately, the homeowner's insurance was kind of cut rate, and so anything going above and beyond that insurance policy, that person is exposed. Right now, if this person had opened, say, an LLC, had the company purchase the LLC and then enter into a lease agreement between his family and the LLC, well, we'd be in a completely different situation whereby this person wouldn't have to worry about their assets, their spouse's assets. And this is really the most important thing, at least from my perspective, Vince, is their children, right? Your legacy, what you were leaving behind. We do a lot of trust and estates work here. And it is really deeply frustrating to build up, not even just personally, like if you're an employee somewhere, but especially if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a serial entrepreneur, you've had exits before, and you've done all of these things to build up your wealth, and it gets all taken away from you before you can pass them on to your kids, which is really just unfortunate. But so really, this is for everybody. This is, it just depends on, the level of sophistication that you're dealing with.
Okay, I'm going to ask this question because a lot of us are in crypto. So when it comes to us, traditionally we're thinking, okay, we have crypto wallets that shouldn't be touchable, when it comes to asset protection for Web3 projects or in the cryptoverse, what are we looking out for? What is at stake?
Well, what's at stake here is that Wiley plaintiffs attorneys and also the IRS and regulators, they know about crypto wallets. It's not like 10 years ago where the vast majority of people had no idea what blockchain was. They had heard of this thing, Bitcoin, but that's about it. Crypto wallets are really, from a legal perspective, just another asset, right? Or rather, should I say, just another place where assets are held. So for Web3 projects, for blockchain-related assets, all of the same rules and all of the same dangers that apply to your physical world assets apply in the blockchain as well. And it's even more so because, as we all know, the whole point of blockchain is a decentralized ledger. You can trace exactly when an asset was transferred, where it was transferred, and under what period of time. And so when, say, someone is bringing an action, or let's just say, just heaven forbid, someone's getting divorced, right? And the divorce filing is about to happen, and all of a sudden, the husband or the wife decides, I'm going to move all of my crypto assets from wallet X to wallet Y, right? It's called a fraudulent conveyance. The court's going to see that and not only claw it back, but also charge you a fine and make sure that you feel the pain for that. So please, it's a common misconception that blockchain and Web3 are these things that, to which these rules do not apply. They absolutely apply. Moreover, due to the nature of blockchain, they apply effectively double because it's easier than with any other asset class to trace when, where, and how.
Interesting. So what would give an individual or business comprehensive asset protection? What are some of the more common tools that are being used?
Well, there are a lot of different tools that are used, and it really depends on the individual situation. I should take this opportunity to say, hey, I'm a lawyer, but I'm not your guys as lawyers. Obviously, I'm here representing the Warren Law Group, and this is for informational purposes only. Obviously, this is a public forum that's being recorded, and so if you're asking a question, there's no attorney-client privilege here. Just to be clear. All right, with that out of the way, some of the tools that we use, again, depending on what you're dealing with, but let's start with the basics, sort of the tinker toys of asset protection. So the first we've already talked about is opening up a corporation or an LLC, some kind of corporate entity that remains separate as a business concern. Another tool that we like to use is the trust. Right now, there are a couple different types of, well, actually, there are many different types of trusts, but the two that I want to highlight here are what's called a grantor trust and what's called an irrevocable trust. So with a grantor trust, the individual still owns the asset. They're still paying taxes on the asset for if that asset makes any income, and they still have some kind of control. And there are some reasons why you would go that route. But an irrevocable trust is a really interesting tool, and it's extremely helpful because what you do is you're giving an asset over, what's called granting it, to this trust. This trust has its own corporate personhood, as it were. A trust can own an LLC. A trust can own real estate. It can own any type of asset. And the trust and those assets are controlled by a third-party trustee, someone who's not you. Now, what rules does the trustee need to follow in moving the assets and working with the assets? It's based on the trust document. So if the grantor is saying, look, I'm irrevocably giving these assets over to this trust, but here are the rules that you need to follow, that means that you have access to the asset without owning or controlling the asset. And that's really important because if you just get the benefit from the asset, but you don't own or control it, that means the IRS can't grab it. It also means that that your ex-spouse can't grab it. And it also means that that a wily plaintiff's attorney, if you're ever sued, can't grab it. So those are, the sort of basic tools are, different types of companies and different types of trusts. And obviously, I'm oversimplifying it because I want to make this simple and reasonably easy to understand. It's not my job to tell people what to do. It's my job to educate my clients and help them make an informed decision, right? So the other type of thing that I want to put as a different type of company, that's called a holding company. Right now, we think of companies as being businesses that are going concerns. That we would call in the corporate law world an operating company. However, if you want the operating company to be owned by another company, which is a really good idea, it creates an additional degree of separation between you as a person and your business. You open a holding company, and that holding company owns 100% or whatever your share is of the operating company. So depending on how sophisticated the situation is, how the income is made, because there are lots of different ways income is made, intellectual property, products, services, etc. There are different types of companies and trusts that you can use in different combinations for maximum benefit.
For those of us, I noticed a couple of people from Asia who may not be as familiar with trusts. Could you give us a little bit of a brief explainer how a trust set up, what jurisdictions they cover, what a trust?
Sure. So a trust, as I was saying before, think of it like a company where you put an asset into and you don't control it. All right. So really, when it comes to asset protection, the holy grail, as it were, the ideal is to have the benefits of all of these assets and to have access to them, without owning them or controlling them for legal purposes. Let me just give you an example from my own practice. A few years ago, I had a client with a yacht. And that client wanted to be able to, go wherever the yacht was docked and just go. right? They had what do you call it? They have their crew and this and that, and they just want to be able to just go and not have to worry about their about it being taxed as if it was a personal asset or things along those lines. So what you can do is put that yacht into a trust, and then have that trust run by a trustee, right? And that trustee, the rules that they use, think of it like you're giving your relative one of your assets. Say, all right, I have this car. I'm going to give my cousin my car, but but I'm allowed to drive the car when I want to, and my cousin has to follow these rules. I'm only allowed to use this kind of gas. I have to get it maintained. I have to have it serviced every quarter, what have you. I think that's probably the best way I can describe a trust.
Interesting. Thank you. So this question came up quite a bit. So offshore and an onshore arrangement, what would you say are the key differences of each? And how does offshore contribute to asset protection?
Sure. So first, let's get something out of the way. Onshore means it's in the country where you live. Offshore means it's not in the country where you live. All right. So you don't have to go off into international waters in order to go offshore. Okay. So here's an example. I'm an American. I live in the United States. Technically speaking, Canada is offshore to me, even though I would never go physically off a shore to get to Canada, right? It's just a common misconception. So from an asset protection perspective, what having offshore entities and offshore companies and offshore trusts allow you to do, it allows you to do two things. And one allows you to take certain assets outside of your home jurisdiction, right? It also allows you to make income off of those assets in that other jurisdiction. So just as an example, say we have a US person who wants to avail themselves of, say, a special economic zone. That special economic zone is in another country. You can open up a company in that special economic zone where, say, cryptocurrency has 0% tax, and have a crypto wallet associated with, and rather should say owned by, the company and or the trust in that special economic zone, so that for the purposes of tax and regulatory issues, you don't own the thing in the United States, that the company does in that other country, or that trust does in that other country, so that you're able to make money from other countries without having to, rather you get to control where and how you pay tax, or you get to control if somebody wants to try to go after those assets in court, whether it be a regulator or just someone who's trying to sue you or your ex-spouse, you get to control where they would have to do it. And that's a really strong tool for asset protection purposes, mostly because we're all familiar with the domestic stuff, the onshore stuff. It becomes much more difficult for somebody to have to go to another country, hire an attorney in another country, deal with the laws of another country. And so you effectively get to pick the home turf. That's why offshore is so interesting and helpful. It doesn't apply to every type of asset. It does apply to most, and that's important.
Do we need residency or citizenship offshore in order to be protected?
Oh, that's a really good question. So first and foremost, let's get this out of the way. Citizenship and residency are two very different things. All right. I'm a citizen of the United States. I am a resident of the state of New York. Right. So if I decide to move to Paris, France, I will become a resident of the country of France and therefore the EU, but not a citizen of the EU. Right. I won't be able to avail myself of free healthcare, education, etc. So you don't technically have to obtain residency in another country to avail yourself of some of the asset protections. You don't have to become a citizen. In fact, becoming a citizen of another country may be not available to you depending on where you're from. So as an example, as an American, the US State Department doesn't really like dual citizenship and doesn't allow dual citizenship with every country. So if I would want to move to another country and become a citizen there, in some situations, I would have to renounce my US citizenship, which would mean that I would no longer have the right to be and travel in the United States. So, but having residency or your company having residency in the in another country is extremely powerful because it gives you that additional protection of saying, well, I'm a resident of this country, not that country. And therefore, for tax purposes and for regulatory purposes, I'm treated differently. Again, it lets you dial it up and down. It lets you control your own fate.
Okay. What are the potential pitfalls, or when you see if we seek residency overseas, or does that naturally equate to us being able to protect our assets if we do so?
Not necessarily. In fact, if you do it wrong, then you might actually put yourself in a worse situation. So let me just give you a couple of examples. So here in the US, it's become very popular to change your residency to Puerto Rico, which is a protectorate of the US, right? So they have this thing called Act 60, which is, zero tax all the time under very specific circumstances. One of those circumstances is that the assets need to be physically in Puerto Rico. Another thing is that you as a person need to physically live in Puerto Rico for a certain amount of time over the course of a year, and continue doing that every year. So what a lot of these crypto entrepreneurs who just got on the Puerto Rico bandwagon a couple of years ago and even today are realizing is, oh no, I'm landlocked. I can't move my assets anywhere. Otherwise, I'm screwing myself. They're almost like golden handcuffs, right? So that's a potential pitfall. Another potential pitfall is not forming the entities correctly and not having them governed in accordance with local law, right? So if you don't have an expert working with you locally and in the jurisdiction where you want to go and in your home jurisdiction, helping you to do it right, then regulators in another country couldn't go after you. Right? They can say, look, we liked it this way, not that way. You did it that way, and therefore we're going to fine you. There are a lot of different ways that can happen, and like every country has its own laws, and they're all sovereign. They have to be respected, right? So you can't, going into just any country willy-nilly is not going to help. In fact, it's more than likely going to hurt you if you're not doing it right.
Thank you. Just want to remind everyone, feel free to ask any questions you have in the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. We have Todd here with us, who's sharing a lot of his expertise and his experience. So please do take this opportunity to direct any questions to him. Now, Todd, tell me, what are some of these stories, some of the horror stories you've heard from your clients or your acquaintances that you have done with, who have not done this right and didn't do this properly?
Sure. So there are two that I want to highlight here today. One is and it's funny because, as a corporate attorney, I'm all about helping you make more money, and I never deal with the court. And it's just nice to not have to deal with a judge. But we have lots of litigators here at the Learn Law Group. And so most of the horror stories that I see are folks who didn't do it right. They come in because they've been sued, or in the case of one particular client, they've been indicted for, it's called a pump and dump. It's like a securities violation. And so what this person did was they had a UK citizen, UK resident, opened up a company in the British Virgin, excuse me, it wasn't British Virgin Islands, it was Cayman. And what they had done was they didn't maintain it right. Right, so they didn't do the corporate compliance stuff they're supposed to. They didn't do the filings they were supposed to. They were cheaping out on it, and as a result, the SEC, the U.S. SEC, came back and said, "Oh, wait a second. All of these Cayman-related assets are now subject to our jurisdiction because even though you weren't in Cayman when you were doing the bad thing, you were doing it under this company and you let everything bleed over. So it's effectively just an alter ego, right? It's like treating Clark Kent and Superman as the same person. So that's on the criminal side, that can get really, really dicey. And I say that not to think that anyone is looking to do anything criminal, but sometimes you think you're doing the right thing and it turns out that you're not, and it causes a lot of problems. So on the civil side, We have this one client right now, the litigators are just all over these days. And they have billed about $1.5 million in legal fees in the last, say, 6 months. And this is, if this person had done it right in the previously, it wouldn't have to go through all this. But essentially what happened here was this person had 3 companies all in different states that they were treating them like they were just all the same. This person had their relatives working for the company, but there were no-show jobs, right? They were just getting money, and then he was pocketing said money. And they were, and all of his personal assets were in his personal name, right? So, well, what happened? The Attorney General's office of a bunch of different states came a-calling and said, hey, what you're doing is improper, right? So something else was improper. And then while the investigations are going on, the litigator is saying, okay, well, we'll try to avail you of bankruptcy protection on the corporate side so that you can just leave the corporation in bankruptcy and move on with your life. Well, it turns out you can't really do that because the corporate veil wasn't strong and they weren't separate. So now this person may have to file for personal bankruptcy protection, and therefore completely screw themselves vis-a-vis their credit score and their ability to do business going forward, because they were too clever by half. This person thought, oh, I have 3 companies, they're never going to go after me, or if they do, I'm protected. Turns out, no, not when all 3 of these corporations are considered one. So, if this person had spoken with someone like me beforehand, said, hey, I want to do it this way, I would have said, okay, there's a compliant version of that, do blah, 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 blah. And then down the line, when the companies came under attack, they would only be able to attack one entity or the other entity, whichever entity was directly involved, as opposed to piercing the corporate veil between 3 companies and therefore being able to pierce the veil between the companies and the person. I mean, this person was a millionaire, and I don't say this to be dramatic, but may end up under the poverty line at the end of the day. It's really quite sad.
Okay, now you're scaring me a bit.
You mentioned that's the thing. It's like
a lot of us do set up like offshore companies, like in the British Virgin Islands or in Cayman Islands, in order, to one of the reasons to avail of tax incentives, and of course the other one is to have a certain degree of protection for assets. What are the most common mistakes people do that you see, that they shouldn't be doing? I mean, in such a way that allows the corporate view to be pierced?
Sure. So there are a few different common mistakes that I see, and I would put them into 3 categories, right? We have the tax problems, we have the regulatory problems, and then we have the civil problems, right? So let's start on the tax problems. What a lot of people do is they think that by moving something offshore, they don't have to report anything. Sometimes that's true, but most of the time it's not. And so what will happen is someone will move certain assets offshore and not show that it's post-tax assets going offshore. The IRS or your local tax regulator comes in and says, hey, we found out that this thing exists. You never reported it. Had you reported it, we would have 0 problem with it, because you don't have to pay tax until you bring that income to our country. But because you didn't report it, that means you're evading taxes, and now you're liable for, you're liable criminally, right? So it's on the tax side. One of the common things is that they don't report when they should, or they just go offshore thinking, okay, I don't have to report when, and if you don't want to report, there are ways to do it in compliance with the law, and that's okay. But if you don't do it that way, then you're evading taxes, and that's a real problem. So that's on the tax side. On the regulatory side, there's having certain business activities which are, say, legal in your country of origin, that are either not legal in this other country or require a license. Let me just give you an example. Let's say someone is a licensed broker dealer of securities in the U.S., say they're like a registered representative or something. They work for a brokerage house, and they open up an offshore entity and do the same thing out there, right? They do, they make introductions leading to the sale of securities. Well, if they didn't register with the local, say, the local securities authority, and in a lot of cases, if you're licensed in your home country and you're only doing private securities transactions, usually the local regulator will just give you your license, but you just have to register first, right? But if you don't register first, then you're committing, then you're violating local law, and you get yourself in regulatory hot water. And the third type I wanted to talk about was on the civil side. These are some of the things that example from earlier did. They had these different companies, but they didn't have separate bank accounts for the companies. They didn't have different tax ID numbers for the companies. They had folks on no-show jobs at each company. They would have contracts with, between a customer and company A, but company B and C would be doing what company A is supposed to do without any contracts between companies A, B, and C. I mean, those are a lot of pitfalls. Even though at the end of the day, you are in control, or you have access to, or you own all of these different things, doesn't mean that they're separated out. You have to do the work. You have to go through the corporate formalities. You have to do the corporate compliance. And at the end of the day, it doesn't cost a whole lot to do it up front, and it saves you a lot in the long run.
Oh, okay. So, well, really, I mean, clearly asset protection is really, really complex. What do you see are main sorry, I think I've got some questions here. So I maybe want to move into some of the Q&A here in the chat, in the chat room. Before we maybe make a quick summary. Okay, so I'd like to know more about the benefits of a trust. Maybe you want to share?
Sure thing. So again, as always, the typical lawyer answer, it depends, but generally speaking, the benefits of having a trust are having access to an asset without owning or controlling it. So that means that, for example, if you have assets in a trust and those assets make income, right? Though that income isn't taxed to you personally, it's taxed to the trust, right? And depending on where the trust is, there might not be any tax at all. So it'll, having, say, an offshore trust allows you to avail yourself of those more those beneficial regulations. Just as an example, in the BVI and British Virgin Islands, there's right now no regulations on virtual currency. I happen to know that may, it will likely change over the next 5 years based on my discussions with local council. However, right now there is none. So if you have a company out in the British Virgin Islands that you own personally as, say, an American or a Singaporean, then you own and control the assets of the company from your home country. However, if that company is owned by a trust where there's a third-party trustee, then only local law applies, and you don't have to worry about the laws and regulations in your country of origin, unless you personally take in income from those assets. I mean, that really is there is the main benefit.
I also like to thank Anonymous for sharing. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I heard you did what Todd's client did and didn't realize you're doing anything wrong, and you actually went to jail for tax-based laundering felony. I'm sorry, very sorry to hear that.
A good chunk of the time, people don't think they're doing the wrong thing, but unfortunately, when a regulator comes a calling and they ask you to prove that you're doing this right in accordance with their regulation, if you can't prove it, that means you might as well have been saying, I want to do the wrong thing all along. It's sad.
Very sorry to hear that, Anonymous. Thank you so much for sharing. So, I mean, really in summary, asset protection is really for everyone. Any of us here who are really doing businesses, or any entrepreneur doing any business should look at asset protection, because you don't want to end up in a situation where you might lose everything that you've built for 10, 20, 30 years. and there are potential criminal liabilities, whether you like it or not, if you don't do it right, like Todd so rightly shared. I think it's very important a lot of people cheap out at the very beginning because just building your business. You don't want to think about lawyers, you don't think about legal fees, you don't want to think about, you just want to sell your product, right? You got an idea, you created something, you just want to go out in the market and really sell about it. But I think at a certain point, we really need to take a step back, and think, and really set about doing it right, sit down with the right counsel, sit down with the right people to talk about what you're doing, and whether or not it's in compliance, and fix it, right? And I think Todd mentioned a lot about the costs of not doing so, right? You'd be in the millions, you could lose everything, and this is definitely not something that we wish on any one of our audience here today. If any of you have any other questions, I would love for you to hear from you guys now.
Yeah, the best analogy I like to use in these situations is it's a lot like going to your doctor or going to the dentist, right? So if you have a little bit of pain and annoyance up front, it's an ounce of prevention that's worth a pound of cure, right? So if you don't go to the doctor, and all of this, it seems like all of a sudden you have this cancer. Well, actually you've had it for a while, and you could have prevented it in the first place or mitigated it had you gone to the doctor over a period of time. So it's really simple. It's, if you really believe in your idea and you think you're going to make a lot of money off of it, shouldn't you be protecting it up front, just like your body? Shouldn't you be protecting your body for the future?
Thank you so much, Todd, for that. Well, clearly, asset protection is very, very complex. Stakes are very, very high. But the question here that we have here is really if there are simpler solutions in the market, and what options are actually available. I actually like to take this opportunity. Before I go launch into that, does a quick question on the Q&A side is, does the criminal background in laundering prevent the person from setting up corporate structures in other jurisdictions with business visas? I think
it's a really good question. Not necessarily, but it's tough. Right. So there are, just as an example, so let's say you have, actually I had to deal with this the client we were talking about earlier, where they have legitimately held assets while they've been indicted, but they have legitimately held assets that they want to move. But they can do it. They can get, say, a company open. They can get a trust opened, and they can run the company through the trust. But you have to be super, super careful. It's possible. Residency is a little harder because most residency programs say that you can't have a conviction for a crime of moral turpitude, but that doesn't mean that you can't open a company or a trust in another jurisdiction.
Thank you. Me, Anonymous, if you're really interested to find out more, and especially regards to your specific circumstances, you could contact us after the webinar. I'm more than happy to help you with your questions. Okay, so without further ado, I actually like to introduce our second speaker for today, Jin Gonzalez. Jin is the founder for Oz Living, and he'll be telling us a little bit more about what Oz does in trying to solve and protect assets. Jin, over to you. Maybe you can quickly introduce yourself and what Oz Living does.
Hey guys, just turn on my screen here. Yeah, so just a quick summary of myself. I'm 25 years an entrepreneur, but last 5 years I was heading digital assets and blockchain for one of the largest banks in the Philippines. My focus was, how do we apply digital assets and blockchain into asset protection? And we focused on trying to see how we could solve that problem in one way, shape, or form. Now, of course, listening to Todd and listening to people speak, about how to protect your assets, sometimes it can get quite confusing. As an entrepreneur, when I approach things, I always try to look at it from a simpler and easier perspective in a way that most people would be able to understand. So if you don't mind, I'll just simplify everything, or try to simplify everything for everyone, right? First is you have to look at yourself, you as an individual. You're not really one person, right? You're actually four persons or four entities that exist in one person, right? You as an individual is one. You also have a role in society. So that might be, you're either an entrepreneur, you work in a company, you're in digital marketing or something like that, right? Another one is you have income, and the other part to you is that you own assets, right? The mistake everybody makes is that you're thinking this is all in the same person, right? This is just you. But the right way to do it is to split all of this up. And by doing so, you are able to now attain several layers of separation in order to achieve complete asset protection. But to get to that point, you have to look at several things, right? First is you have to look at other countries, the laws and treaties between countries and that exist in other countries, in order for you to be able to reside in these locations, set up your trust, set up your tax incentive operations, and the like. The other piece there is, okay, how do I now take a look at regulatory enforcement? Every government is different in the way they enforce their rules, their laws, and their treaties, right? So some are more light, some are heavier. So now you have to look at, there are around 5,400 zones around the world that in one way, shape, or form provide these incentives. Which is the best one, right? It's kind of hard to figure that one out. And then now that you've decided on it, you have to now look at, okay, what are the local requirements, and do the local requirements apply to what you can submit, and are you going to get approved? And then you have to seek the right expertise in order to be able to avail of these services. Next, you need to get a tax opinion in order to protect yourself and show that the structure that you set up, so it's a tax opinion and legal opinion to show that the structure you set up is done properly, right? So what you need to assess is are the relationships between these companies, right? You have to set up the structure within each company. And you now have to ensure that when you execute all this, you can maintain it for the long term. So you have to look at the internal structure, and you have to look at the contractual relationships. So it's a lot to go over, right? In order to now split you up in as your role, your income, and your assets. So the question that we had in Oz Living was, how do we simplify this? And how do we make it so simple that all you need to do is, at least in the digital asset space, and that's been my specialty for the past 5 years, is you just purchase a token and you stake it. In other words, you lock it in for a specific number of years, and you receive the structure and the residency in order to give you that 3 layers of separation and protect your assets for now and for the future. Okay, so the first part in this journey was seeing how we could isolate the two, or at least achieve these two. How do you receive residency, and how do you receive tax incentivized operations, and what is the best jurisdiction and structure for you to set it up in? So there's around 5,400 special economic zones around the world. Now, these special economic zones account for anywhere from 20% to 30% of every country's GDP, depending on which country. In fact, in China, it accounts for around 30%. Philippines, it's around 17 to 20%. Now, that's significant, but these zones are geopolitically delimited areas, or separate areas, that are allowed to create their own policies, which allows for people to operate businesses and themselves in a tax incentivized environment, right? So it just so happens that the country that I live in, which is the Philippines, is the second largest producer of special economic zones in the planet. And the largest special economic zone out of the Philippines, which is AFAB, engaged us in order to be able to move things forward. So we started with the law itself, right, which is a Republic Act 11453, which allows for the issuance, exchange, and custody of digital assets. And then we moved into implementing rules and regulations. And then we got an exclusive mandate as well as an exchange. And then we were able to launch the token. But the whole point here was that the entire structure that was set up was done the right way. And it was done in a way such that the website itself, if you go to afab.gov.ph, it's very rare that you'll see a asset protection service supported by a token to be listed. In fact, it doesn't even exist except here to be listed on a government website. But if you go to afab.gov.ph, the project and the token is listed on the site. So it's sanctioned by the government. So what did we do? So now with that, we achieved residency through investment or through the staking of tokens. And the second was for you to receive your tax incentivized operations. The other part there was establishing the trust and establishing a holding company, which needed to be done. Now, the trust and the holding company are the two last pieces that Warren Law Group, that we engaged Warren Law Group in. So what exactly happened? Well, we had to establish the relationship between you, the trust, your tax incentivized operations, and your holding company, picking the right jurisdiction, establishing the right contractual relationships, and also solidifying the structure within each one so that when the time comes that you're audited, you have the right tax opinion in place in order to defend yourself and show that what you're doing is completely legitimate and within the realm of the law. So our goal is just to completely simplify the service, right? Rather than you trying to pick, okay, what jurisdiction and all of those questions that you need to answer, it's quite simple. The first is just basic residency. In simple terms, it's a bug out bag, right? So if you want to be able to live in another country at any given point in time, if you don't want to live, if something happens to your current country, you have to have that bug out bag. So what this does is for you staking a token for a specific period of time, you can gain residency on an indefinite basis in the Philippines, you don't need to live there. You're not landlocked like in Puerto Rico, where you have to stay for 183 days. In the Philippines, you just come in, get your biometrics. After that, you're done. It's an indefinite visa. The second is the second package is a asset protection plan. So you can get 3 layers of separation where you separate your role, which is through a trust, your income through a tax-friendly operation, and your assets through a tax-friendly holding company, right? Structured under Warren Law and under AFAB, which is and we're able to deliver this in a very short period of time. Now, obviously, some people will want to be able to take the entire package. So the entire package is you avail of Philippine residency and your international asset protection plan. So what's that? You basically receive residency for yourself and your family, plus you receive a professionally structured asset protection program granting privacy, light regulation, and tax incentivized operation. Now, as a service, it's quite simple, right? The residency part is actually pretty cool because you put out 75 and you have the option of receiving back 75 after 6 years. So nothing lost there except maybe for inflation, right? Or you can receive it back in the form of tokens. Either way, it's just cash back. Now, the service side is you put 35,000 out, right? And that's actual service fee. You're paying for the setup of your service, right? Of your 3 layers of separation. But if you want to avail of all, then that is at a 10% reduced cost, where it's $100,000, and you have still the option of a $75,000 cashback should you want to exercise the option after 12 months. So what's it like compared to other zones? On the residency side, the Philippines is actually one of the most affordable with the best benefits. So under this structure, it's just the $75,000 in cost to invest. There are no fees to be able to set it up, right? There is no presence required. So you just come in, you give your biometrics, you can receive it within 30 to 45 days. Should you pass KYC and AML requirements, tax-wise, if you do it with the asset protection plan, it's 0%, right? You do have multi-country access because we're part of the ASEAN. Now, on the asset protection side, what you receive is the 3 layers of separation, which if you avail of on retail could cost as high as around $95,000. but since it's a one size fits most, it's around $25,000 for the service fee if you take it as a whole package on the 100,000 package. Now, for us to be able to deliver this to you, it's quite simple. All you got to do is just sign up for an account on Oz Living. You submit your requirements upon staking of your tokens, and you receive your residency upon submission within 30 to 60 days. Now, of course, this requires you to be able to come into the Philippines, get your biometrics, and that's about it. But it is an indefinite residency. Second, for the asset protection plan under 3 layers of separation, that's around 30 to 90 days in collaboration with Warren Law Group to be able to deliver the product to you. So we have, to give an example of 2 live instances that we have. One is a Singaporean, right? What he did was he staked for 75,000. He received his residency actually within 45 days, exactly on the 45th day. The other is Emil Allen. So he received residency and the full asset protection plan under one size fits most. That is for $100,000 stake, and the whole package was delivered within a 90-day period. That's it. So I hope that was able to help you guys out and show you how we are able to simplify the whole process for asset protection and residency. And if you do have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer.
Thank you, Jin. Is there any questions from anyone about Oz Living? Not good. I invite everyone to please set up appointments with us directly to our Oz Living website. Wanda, if you don't mind showing our slides.
Sounds good.
Great. So please do check out our website, ozliving.com. It's a brand new site that we've set up. Anyone scan this QR code and get a copy of our digital brochure. We thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for spending the time with us. And join us and catch our next episode on asset protection, privacy, regulation, and lower tax, specifically for Web3 projects and other online businesses. Thank you. And all of you have a great night, great day, wherever you are. Sorry, Jin. Yes.
Yeah, one last thing. So the entire series has to do with privacy protection, light regulation, and tax-reduced living. And the program is a series of 4 webinars that is going to occur in the next 4 weeks. It is going to conclude with an entire day. Actually, it's a 1-week event that's going to be held out of Miami, Florida. That is going to be from the 15th to the 19th of November. So everybody's invited to that. Now, all of this is provided free of charge to the public. So whether you avail of our services or not, it's okay. Whether you avail of Warren Law services or not, it's okay. All the information that is going to be provided to you is put out there in order to educate you and help you, right? So please feel free to attend all of the following sessions that we have. This session is quite light. Next sessions, we're going to go more and more in depth, and then in Miami, it's going to go completely much more greater detail. That's going to, all of the information is available on our website at ozliving.com.
The whole process would take 30 to 60 days, as Jin mentioned before. There was a question by Anonymous. So yeah. Again, we have a whole series of events, webinars, seminars planned for everybody. Please do join our ozliving.com website and follow us. Scan this QR code, you get a copy of our digital brochure with our entire set of schedule. We look forward to being with you, educating you on asset protection, specifically. And yes, if there's any other questions, let us know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks for your time.
Good night.
Good night, guys. Or good morning, wherever you are.
Morning.